Today's lesson is Chapter 6, Lesson 8, on pages 423 through 428. Our objective is I can multiply mentally using the associative property, commutative property, and identity property. Our vocabulary is associative property, commutative property, and identity property. Question 1. Which property states that 6 times 5 equals 5 times 6? Question 2. The identity property states that any number times 1, that the number keeps its own blank.
Hi guys, today we'll be learning about the multiplication properties. Now there are 4 multiplication properties and we'll go through them one by one so that you understand them. The first property is commutative property. Now the commutative property is basically reverse operations. So if you have 4 times 7, in the commutative property, you can write this as 4 times 7 or 7 times 4. Either way, it does not matter because you will still get the same product of 28. So, that is the commutative property. The next property of multiplication is the associative property. So that is associative property. And the associative property is pretty much like the commutative property, except for in the associative property, you have 3 numbers, and 2 of them are in parentheses. So, for example, if we have 2 times 6 times 9, and 2 and 6 are in parentheses, you can also write this as 2 times 6 times 9, and then put 6 and 9 in parentheses. Either way, you'll still get the same product. Now, the third property of multiplication is the identity property. Now, when I think of identity, it means the same thing as you, right? Like an identical person. Well, identity property of multiplication is pretty much the same thing, except for it's math related. So in identity property, if you multiply any number by 1, you will get the same answer. So what I'm trying to say is, if you have 2 times 1, your product will always equal 2. If you have 54 times 1, you will still get 54. So that is the identity property because you're still getting the same product. The last but not least property of multiplication is the zero property. Now the zero property has to do something with zeros. So if you have, let's say, maybe a big number like 3026 times 0, no matter the value of the 3026, your answer will always equal 0. So that's why it's called the zero property, because no matter what number it is, because numbers are infinite, even if you have the biggest number in the world that you can even think of, and you multiply that by 0, your product will always equal 0. So that's it for the multiplication properties. If you want to understand this topic better, you can always visit our website, and there you will find more examples of these properties, and you can practice them, and I hope you guys understood.
Okay, so most of these properties you probably remember from when we were adding decimals. And in this case, it's just with multiplication. So on page 423, it's showing you that the associative property of multiplication means that whenever you change how factors are grouped, it doesn't change the product. So like here, they're grouped 16 times 2 is in parentheses, then times 5. But that's the same thing as 16 times 2 times 5 in parentheses, because they're all multiplication, so we can change the grouping around. Okay, so here's the commutative and identity. So with commutative, you can change around the order and it doesn't change the product. So if we had 17 times 35 and 5/10, it'd be the same thing as 35 and 5/10 times 17. So it can tell you the unknown. In this case, they left it blank so that you would be able to figure it out with the commutative property. With identity property, that's where she was talking about we multiply by 1. So I know in the last time we talked about these properties when we were adding decimals, the identity property was if you add 0, that doesn't change your answer, it stays the same. In this case, it's times 1, because you guys know that anything times 1 is just the same factors. So 17 times 1 is the same as 17. And I'll show you that. Alright, so let's look back at these 2 questions, and they are in your form as well. So which property is this? 6 times 5 is the same as 5 times 6. And the identity property states that any number times 1, then that number keeps its own what?